Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I will try and do a teshuvah for my unclear fast day shiur and hopefully make things a little clearer. It's astonishing how lack of caffeine makes it hard to think. The very simple question we're addressing is Shittos Rashi, who Tosfos reads correctly, Tosfos doesn't need my agreement, as saying that the answer of the Gemara as to why here you are exempt, even though it is a psik reisha, is because this is lo nichale, meaning you don't want the result as opposed to just being apathetic about it. And Tosfos asks from the Gemara in Daf Kuf Gimel, in which we see the Gemara seems to say that it's enough that it's ba'ara de chavrei, that the incidental field improvement that's happening is in someone else's field, and that's enough to make it potter for psik reisha. Evidently, neutrality or apathy is enough. You don't need a positive want. And the first point I made was that as far as the Gemara, the question from the Gemara is concerned, one could answer it according to Rashi. One could suggest when the Gemara says ba'ara de chavrei, it means where you don't want to improve his field. He's a competitor, he's a rival, you don't like the fellow, you don't want to improve his field. And therefore you positively don't want it rather than just being neutral. However, Tosfos ultimately is correct because Rashi doesn't explain the Gemara like that. Rashi understands the Gemara to mean that you're neutral, and nonetheless that is sufficient to exempt you from psik reisha. So a simple answer to Rashi's question would be, that Rashi indeed agrees with Tosfos that normally speaking, lo nichale, as in neutrality, is enough to exempt you from a psik reisha. Why? Because it's a melacha she'en tzricha legufa. It's a melacha where you don't do it for its intended guf, the core purpose of the melacha. However, Rashi is of the opinion that melacha she'en tzricha legufa doesn't help over here, because we're dealing with the melacha of netilas neshama. Netilas neshama is fundamentally a kilkul melacha. According to Rabbi Shimon, you are chayev for a kilkul with netilas neshama. That means to hold it, and that means to say that Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold that the exemption of melacha she'en tzricha legufa, that of melachos mashavos applies to this melacha. And if melachos mashavos doesn't apply to this melacha, nor would melacha she'en tzricha legufa apply. So just to summarize, Tosfos says that apathy is sufficient to exempt you because it's not melacha she'en tzricha legufa. Rashi says, I agree. Normally, apathy is sufficient to exempt you. However, here we're talking about netilas neshama. Netilas neshama is always a mekalkel. Rabbi Shimon holds that nonetheless you're chayav for this mekalkel because the rules of melachos mashavos don't apply to netilas neshama. If melachos mashavos doesn't apply to netilas neshama, then the exemption of melacha she'en tzricha legufa also wouldn't. And therefore, the regular melacha she'en tzricha legufa wouldn't be enough, and therefore apathy isn't enough to exempt you. What would be enough to exempt you? Not apathy. Apathy just means lack of purpose. Lack of purpose doesn't exempt you with netilas neshama, because netilas neshama is always a negative melacha, a kalkal type melacha. But what would exempt you is positive intention against causing the result. Negativity, active negativity, where I don't want the result. That wrenches away the side consequence of the melacha and means this isn't my melacha, it's not what I'm engaged in. The logic of melacha she'en tzricha legufa is that I'm not engaged in the side melacha. Psik reisha means it's definitely going to happen and therefore it's intertwined. Active negativity, active not wanting the result, wrenches away the side melacha, and therefore I'm not engaged in it, and therefore I am exempt. So in brief, Rashi says over here you need negativity, because the normal exemption of melacha she'en tzricha legufa wouldn't apply because it's the melacha of mekalkel. But in general, Rashi would agree that neutrality is enough because the p'tur of melacha she'en tzricha legufa would apply. This is a reading in Rashi. Now what comes out is that Rashi holds that melacha she'en tzricha legufa isn't relevant over here with the melacha of netilas neshama, because he understands that melacha she'en tzricha legufa is a melachos mashavos type exemption. Whereas Tosfos holds that melacha she'en tzricha legufa is not linked to melachos mashavos, and therefore it would apply over here. Again, Rabbi Shimon holds that the rule of melachos mashavos doesn't apply by mekalkel, because it doesn't apply by netilas neshama, in the same way as mekalkel doesn't apply by netilas neshama. The debate between Rashi and Tosfos is, does the principle of melacha she'en tzricha legufa apply here? Tosfos says yes, and therefore apathy is enough to stop it being a melacha shein tzricha l'gufa. Rashi says no, melacha shein tzricha l'gufa is not relevant here because there's no din menachas mashavas, and therefore you need active, engaged disapproval, diswant, the unwant of the negative want of the outcome.
Can I just ask, that negative want, is that because it's a mekalka b'chaburah and not melachet machshevet, it's like an issa in kol haTorah kula? Is that the point?
No, it would presumably still be a it may be a kol haTorah kula svara of Dov Hashem Miskavein, or a Shabbos svara that I've wrenched it away from my action because I don't want this result. How can I say I was engaged in killing it when I didn't want to kill it, when I actively didn't want to kill it? Either way, Rashi learns that melachot shein tzricha l'gufa doesn't apply over here because he understands that the exemption on melachot shein tzricha l'gufa is a meleches machshavas type exemption. And so holds no, melachot shein tzricha l'gufa applies over here because it's not a meleches machshavas exemption. Why would they argue over this? So I suggested it links up to the more general machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. Tosfos holds the reason that melachot shein tzricha l'gufa is exempt is because it's not dumya de Mishkan, it's not similar to the Mishkan. Each melacha was done in the Mishkan for a particular purpose, and if you do it for a different purpose, you wouldn't be chayiv. There's nothing to do with meleches mashaves. Even if I did my melacha with a specific purpose and directionality, Tosfos says I would be exempt because I have to do it for the specific purpose labeled in the Mishkan. Rashi, however, holds that I don't need to do it for a particular purpose in the Mishkan. All I have to do is for a active, positive purpose. I want the outcome as opposed to removing a problem. That's a classic melachas mashavas type svara, which is that for Shabbos you need positively focused, directed melachas, and therefore Rashi understands the exemption of melachas shein tzricha l'gufa is a melachas mashavas type exemption, and therefore wouldn't apply by netilas neshama where there's no din of melachas mashavas. So we have a very important whole Masechet machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos. What the reason for the what melachot shein tzricha l'gufa means. Doesn't mean I'm not doing it for the purpose in the Mishkan, or doesn't mean only when I'm trying to remove a problem rather than do something positive, like trap a bee so that I don't have the bee, as opposed to trapping the bee so I have the animal or the bee to skin it or use it. The suggestion is that this, in our sugya, it's taught to us that this is linked to the fact that Rashi holds that the exemption on melachot shein tzricha l'gufa is a melachas mashavas exemption. It's about directionality and purposefulness. And according to Tosfos, it's about how similar it is to the Mishkan. That's a headline summary of what I was trying to say on Sunday, and I hope it's a little clearer. If it's not, please listen to the recording.
Could I just ask, Rabbi, on the basis that Tosfos understand melachot shein tzricha l'gufa to be lo dumya de Mishkan, I'm struggling with the actual sugya of the Gemara and the last line of it, where it doesn't seem to be the punchline being anything to do with lo dumya de Mishkan. It seems to be in line with trying to not ensure that the Chilazon dies.
So I want to say a few points. The first is, this isn't a question on me. This is a question on Tosfos, meaning whether my reading of Rashi is right or wrong, and whether my suggestion of linking Rashi and Tosfos over here to Rashi and Tosfos over there, you can argue me as much as you want. But the fact is that there's serious problems with Tosfos' reading of the language of the Gemara, because Tosfos says that neutrality is enough, and the Gemara says no, you need positive negativity. You actively don't want it. So that's a problem in the reading of the Gemara anyway. And you're right, the problem is compounded if the point is that you don't want it for the same purpose as the Mishkan. So in essence, really, the Rishonim asked this question on Tosfos. This is what the Ritva asks on Tosfos. He says, according to Tosfos, why does the Gemara need to say that you don't want it? It should have just said you're neutral, that there's a purposelessness about it. Neutrality means purposelessness. There's no purpose. And Tosfos holds it's melachot shein tzricha l'gufa, that you're purposeless in doing it. So why does the Gemara say lo nichale? So there's two answers you can give to this question. Either the Gemara said it because it's the truth. The fact is it's not just purposeless. You positively don't want it because you don't want to ruin it. And the Gemara therefore says the truth, that you don't want it, but the relevant halachic aspect of it is the purposelessness of it. Or the Gemara is saying this in order to feed Rabbi Yehuda, because the truth is we have another question on the sugya, which is the Gemara answers according to Rabbi Shimon why you're not chayav from netilas neshama, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds Dova she'einu miskavein psik reisha is chayav, how would he answer why you're exempt from netilas neshama? And Rabbi Yehuda, don't forget, holds that you're chayav from melacha shein tzricha l'gufa. He doesn't agree with this exemption of melacha shein tzricha l'gufa, and therefore the Gemara gives a richer answer. It gives an answer which is further than it needed to say of that lo nichale, you actively don't want it in order to feed Rabbi Yehuda in the sugya. So answers the Rishonim the problematic language of the Gemara. But whether you go with that answer or not, but that this is a question on Tosfos. This is nothing. This isn't my problem. This is Tosfos' problem. That Tosfos says neutrality is enough to exempt you, and the Gemara goes further and says you're not just neutral. You actively don't want the Chilazon to die.
In terms of the mahalach of the Gemara here, don't we have to identify that there is a second melacha according to Rabbi Yehuda? I mean, that's why we resolve it according to Rabbi Shimon, saying no, it's only one. But we still, we've set aside the idea that it's Disha. Somebody suggested that it's Disha, and that's been rejected. So why can't you come to the end and say, actually, we've come to the end of the Gemara and we've demonstrated that via Tosfot that this is according to Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Yehuda thinks it is until Neshama, and that's the second one of Rabbi Yehuda.
Because the answer is it's not the simplest reading of the Gemara. Really, the question, I should have said this clearer, the question of Rabbi Yehuda is there should be a third malacha of Netilas Neshama. Because the first malacha is Seder, that's not controversial. The second malacha, the Gemara seems to say explicitly, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is Disha. And he doesn't hold this issue.
That's rejected, isn't that?
No, it doesn't. It sounds like the Gemara is not saying that. It says, my Talmud Rabbanon. What's the reason of the Rabbanon who argue on Rabbi Yehuda? Kasavi ain't Disha ala l'gedolei karka.
Do we know a source of Rabbi Yehuda saying that he doesn't agree with that reading of the Rabbanan about Gedolei Karka?
We possibly do, because the Gemara says Shahoya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Psiya B'chal Disha, which sounds like the Gemara is saying we know that that's what Rabbi Yehuda used to say. So it sounds like the Gemara knows what the second malacha of Rabbi Yehuda is, which is Disha, not Nesilas Neshama. In which case we have a question: why is there no third malacha according to Rabbi Yehuda of Nesilas Neshama? That's certainly the easiest reading of the Gemara.
Why can't you just say per Tosfot, if the actual Av Malacha here we're talking about is Shechita, and the Mishkan version of that, I'm assuming, is Shechita of a deer, we said, didn't we, in the Mishnah, yeah? I showed it as a Savi, isn't it? Yeah. So if that is the classical Mishkan version, why can't you just very simply get out of this and say per Tosfot, this is not Dumya de Mishkan, because you're not doing anything to do with a deer, you're doing something to do with the Chilazon. And then don't get into this whole thing.
Tachash, they had to kill those.
Yeah, but I don't know I'm just telling you the Mishnah talks about deer, doesn't it?
But what you are, Adam, I'm not understanding the crux of your question
though. Oh no, so this is Hashochta. I'm saying this falls under the Av Malacha of Shechita, yes?
Yes.
And Neshama falls under Shechita. What is the Shechita, which is the Mishkan version of Shechita, that Tosfot would have to be like that? And if it's not like that, it's going to be a Melacha Sheina Sricha Legufa. So if a Chilazon isn't like the Mishkan version of Shechita, you've got your exemption from that, haven't you?
That's correct. Shechita means I want to end the animal's life to get something from the animal. So it doesn't need to be a kosher animal. I can shech the deer because I want to eat the meat. I can shech the deer because I want its skin, and I can shech the lion because I want to hang a lion's head in the antechamber of my castle. But whatever the case may be, shechita is that I'm killing the animal because I want it. Whereas here with the Chilazon, the Gemara is answering, I don't want the Chilazon dead, which Tosfos learns to mean not, the point of the Gemara's answer isn't that I don't want it dead, it's that I don't care for the death of the Chilazon. And that's why it's a Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufa. Because in the Mishkan, I kill an animal because I want the animal dead, whereas with the Chilazon, I kill the animal without caring whether the animal is dead. And therefore it's Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufa. That you're correct, that's how Tosfos answers the Gemara. And that's why Tosfos says that apathy is enough. As long as I don't want the animal dead, that's sufficient to make it exempt, because it's not a Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufa. Okay, this is how an attempted reading in Rashi, and I guess just for the sake of the sort of maths of the sugya, since this came up, the question of how Tosfos would read the language of the Gemara, and I mentioned that the Ritva asks this question on Tosfos. He says, why according to Tosfos does the Gemara say you actually don't want it dead? Why doesn't it just say you don't care? And he says either because it's the truth that you don't want it dead, or it's in order to answer Rabbi Yehuda. The truth is the Ramban also asks the same question. The Ramban also says this. The Ramban says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you should be mechayiv telos. You should be chayiv 3. In other words, besides sod and dosh, you should also be chayiv for netilas neshama. Now, the explanation of this question is because Rabbi Yehuda holds you're chayiv for davar she'einu miskavein, and Rabbi Yehuda also holds that you're chayiv for melacha she'ein tzrich legufa, in which case the answer of the Gemara wouldn't work. Now, Tosfos seems to say another answer to this question of why you would be exempt according to Rabbi Yehuda. Does anyone know what answer Tosfos would give as to why you would be exempt according to Rabbi Yehuda? How would Tosfos answer this question?
I don't know whether this helps, but we have seen a statement of Rabbeinu Tam, who said that you could take out the dye that you need and still let the Chilazon live.
The Gemara, though, isn't going with that, right? The Gemara is going with the fact that you're killing the Chilazon. And it's not, that's the question of Rabbi Shimon, and that has to come up with a whole lomdus of why you're not chayiv comes Rabbi Shimon. The Rambam's question is that none of that lomdus would work according to Rabbi Yehuda.
Makalka b'chaburah is potter. Makalka b'chaburah is potter by Rabbi Yehuda.
Excellent. That's how Tosfos would answer the question. So again, the Rambam says you should be chayiv 3. You should be chayiv for dosh and sod, which we've spoken about. But you should also be chayiv for netilas neshama. The Gemara's answer of davar she'einu miskavein doesn't work according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda holds you're chayiv for davar she'einu miskavein. The Gemara's answer of melacha she'ein tzrich legufa doesn't work according to Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda holds you're chayiv for melacha she'ein tzrich legufa. So how would Rabbi Yehuda answer the question? Now the Ritva answers the question as we saw by saying that's why the Gemara says lo nichale, you actively don't want it dead. But in Tosfos we can give a simple answer to the question. Tosfos said at the beginning that this whole sugya is predicated on a problem that Rabbi Shimon creates, because Rabbi Shimon says that for netilas neshama you are chayiv, even for a mekalkel, even for something that ruins it, because netilas neshama is an exception to the rule of a melacha can't be a mekalkel. But Tosfos says explicitly that according to Rabbi Yehuda, it would be a mekalkel, and therefore therefore you are chayiv for it. So this would be an answer to the question according to Tosfos. Let's have a look at Tosfos where Tosfos says it. And this is Tosfos Divrei Hamaschil V'lechayiv. Tosfos says V'lechayiv nami mishum l'netilas neshama. So it says Afidu Rabbi Yehuda to Amar Mekalka b'chaburah pata. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is Mekalka b'chaburah is pata. Parashape. The question is a good question because it's because that here there's a tikkun katsas because you're stopping it flapping around, and therefore you gain by killing the animal. So Tosfos starts off by being bothered by this question. How can the Gemara say that you should be chayiv because of netilas neshama? Surely it's a mekalkel. Now, according to Rabbi Shimon, with the netilas neshama you're chayiv even with the mekalkel. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're potter if it's a mekalkel. On that Tosfos says no. Killing the chilazon is not mekalkel because a dead chilazon is easier to work with than a live chilazon because it flaps around. It stops moving around when it's alive, and it flaps around when it's alive. When it's dead, it's easier to extract the blood because it stops flapping around. So says Tosfos. Then Tosfos carries on and says that in the answer of the Gemara, when the Gemara says you prefer it not to be dead because the ink, the dye is better when the chilazon is alive, it now turns out that killing the chilazon is just a mekalkel, and therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, the Gemara can ask the question that you should be chayiv because Rabbi Shimon holds you're chayiv from a mekalkel of netilas neshama. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you would be exempt because it's mekalkel, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that mekalkel b'chaburah is potter. So, in brief, just to summarize what I've said, in the conclusion of the Gemara that you don't want the chilazon dead, Tosfos holds it's a mekalkel to kill the chilazon. If it's a mekalkel to kill the chilazon, then Rabbi Yehuda would say, great, and now I know the answer why you're not chayiv for netilas neshama, because it's mekalkel to kill a chilazon, and mekalkel is exempt. The whole problem is in Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon holds that you're chayiv for mekalkel of chaburah, and therefore the whole sugya is only a sugya in Rabbi Shimon. Which means to say that the Ramban, who doesn't give this answer, he thinks that, that over here, it wouldn't be mekalkel because there's something positive. What would be positive? Because the Chilazon doesn't flap around and it's easier to work with a dead Chilazon than a live Chilazon. So what comes out is that we have a machlokus, Ramban and Tosfos, whether killing the Chilazon here is called mekalkel. Tosfos says it's called a mekalkel because I don't want the Chilazon dead. I prefer a live Chilazon because the ink is better quality. The dye is better quality when the Chilazon is alive. The Ramban says, true, the dye, the ink is a better quality when the Chilazon is alive, and therefore I don't want the Chilazon dead. But the fact is, in killing the Chilazon, there's also an advantage, because now it's dead and it's easier to work and extract the blood from a dead Chilazon rather than from a live Chilazon. And therefore this isn't called mekalkel. So it would seem that Tosfos looks at the net. Overall, is this a good result? No, a live Chilazon is better for ink than a dead Chilazon, mekalkel. The Ramban says, let's break it into pieces. In one respect, a live Chilazon is better than a dead Chilazon, better quality ink. But in another respect, a live Chilazon is worse than a dead Chilazon. It's easier to extract from a dead Chilazon than a live Chilazon. And therefore, in that respect, the Malacha has brought a benefit about it. So I'm just bringing this out as a conceptual machlokus. What defines mekalkel? Do we look at the totality, dead Chilazon worse than live Chilazon by killing its mekalkel? Or no, we look at it in bits. In some respects, the dead Chilazon is worse because the ink is lower quality. In other respects, it's better because it's easier to work with a dead Chilazon than a live Chilazon. Just an interesting point in the Gemara. So this is a second.
Would you say that from the conclusion of the Gemara, the implication would be that we hold the latter, or at least this Gemara does, that we look at it in parts?
No, it's not clear cut. It depends how you read the Gemara. The Gemara is going in Rabbi Shimon, let's say. The Gemara's answer is that it's a dover, it's, let's say, like Tosfos, it's melachot she'ein tzricha legufa. Or like Rashi, it's lo nichale. So it's not saying anything about mekalkel. How do we answer according to Rabbi Yehuda? Why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, where dover she'ein is kavin chayev, melachot she'ein tzricha legufa chayev. Why are you not chayev for Netzilas Neshama? Tosfos would answer because it's mekalkel. The Ramban would say, no, that's not a good answer because it's true, it damages it in some respects by killing it, it makes it lower quality ink. On the other hand, it improves it in other respects because it's a non-moving Chilazon, and it's easier to kill a non-moving Chilazon than to milk a non-moving Chilazon than a live Chilazon. So there's no right, it remains, as far as I know, an unresolved machlokas. I didn't really find discussion in the postscript around this point, that's why I'm interested in mentioning it. What's the definition of mekalkel? Do we look at mekalkel net, or do we look at break mekalkel into pieces? If there's some gain and some loss, is that sufficient to make it not mekalkel? I don't really find a clear eye, but there seems to be a machlokas Ramban and Tosfos. In practical halacha, there's not a major nafkamina, because either way, drabanon, we don't do it. But it would be nafkaminas when it comes to pekuach nefesh situations or miral akum scenarios and the like. It'd be interesting to know exactly how we define mekalkel. And I don't, unfortunately, I don't know all of Hilchos Shabbos, but I wasn't able to find a clear sort of discussion around this point.
It reminds me a bit of like when you hear good news which ends up being bad or bad good in Brachot, the Mishnah, what you say?
Yeah. The Mishnah says that someone who, just to give the background to Adam's comment, Mishnah says someone who gets news that their parent has died and they've inherited a large fortune. So they make dain ha'emes on the death and the bereavement, and they make hatov ha'metiv an inheritance of a large fortune. So says the Mishnah. So Adam is arguing this is for a digital rather than an analog model of obviously this isn't derived from Shabbos, but it's a nice comparison.
Rabbi, can I just ask a slightly more basic question on the sugya?
Yes.
The sugya never mentions the word dover she'eino miskavein. It says misasek, and we know Tosfos said no, that's lav dafka, it's a dover she'eino miskavein. But you said a few weeks ago that the pashtus of Rashi is he understands misasek as misasek as we know it. But the last few shiurim we've been talking about Rashi's understanding more along a dover she'eino miskavein kind of model.
Okay, so this is a really good point, and it was really the next point I wanted to address. So it's an absolute right question to ask. I've been going with the model of Rashi of dover she'eino miskavein because this is one possible reading in Rashi. I'm not sure how to read Rashi, and because this is the way some of the Rishonim seem to take it. Because don't forget, after Rashi talks about misasek, he says, now we don't know when Rashi says she'eino miskavein shiyomas, does he mean like Tosfos, a general dover she'eino miskavein, or is that a way of saying it's not misasek? And this really gets us into the problem of what not miskavein means. again, just to remind ourselves of the difference, Dover She'einu Miskavin is where I'm oblivious to the second action that's happening. I think I'm picking up daffodils off the floor, and I don't realize I'm kotza, I'm plucking them out of the ground. That's misasik. Dover She'einu Miskavin is, I know the result that's happening, but I'm disinterested in it. It's Einu Miskavin, not in the sense that I'm oblivious to the action, but Einu Miskavin in that I don't intend to do that action. So which one is our sugya talking about? Now, Rashi says, it begins by saying it's misasik, but to be fair, that's really just the language of the Gemara. And then he says at the end, you're not miskavin. Does he mean by that Dover She'einu Miskavin? In other words, I know full well what's going to happen, but I'm not interested in causing it. Or does he mean I'm oblivious to the death because I know awareness that I was doing it? Besides Tosfos' proof that we can't be talking about misasik here, as Tosfos says, it's also a little difficult to understand how the concept of misasik would make sense over here. Because misasik means I'm oblivious to this. Now, surely Chilazon farmers are aware that they're killing the Chilazon. In fact, the Gemara says at the end that they try not to. So how can you argue this as misasik? Misasik is when I'm completely unaware of the results I'm creating. Whereas Dover She'einu Miskavin is I'm aware, but I just didn't want to do it. I was dragging the bench along the ground. I knew it was making a fire. That was never my intentionality in doing the melacha. So I don't really know what to make of a sugya that learns misasik. And I even began having heretical thoughts that maybe no one learns the sugya as misasik, and Tosfos is the only way of reading the sugya, that it's a Dover She'einu Miskavin. Until my soul was saved by Rabbi Hananel, who clearly seems to learn the sugya as a misasik. And I think I printed the Rabbi Hananel in the source sheet, and Rabbi Hananel absolutely learns it as a misasik sugya. Let's have a look at Rabbi Hananel. It's on page 3 in the sources, source number 7. And then the Rabbi Hananel begins introducing the shas sugya of misasik, and the general rules of misasik. Now the Gemara says that misasik b'chalovim v'aroyas chayev mishum denehena. So this is a general principle of the Gemara, that if you are misasik in chalovim or aroyas, you are completely unaware that you are eating non-kosher foods. You're oblivious to eating non-kosher foods. You thought you were eating kosher food. You didn't realize you took it's not shogeg even. It's something where you're oblivious to the act. Or aroyas, you were misasik in aroyas. You were completely oblivious to the act of biyah, of intercourse. The Gemara says there the concept of misasik doesn't make sense. Shekain nehena, because you're benefiting. Now, a lot of ink has been spilled about what exactly that svara means, but basically what it's saying is that eating and intercourse, biyah, aroyas, are not actions in the sense of doing things, they're experiential. When it comes to experience, the concept of misasik doesn't make sense. The londos of misasik is I'm completely oblivious to the other action that's happening, and that it's in no way connected to me. But when it comes to eating or aroyas, shekinena, where it's an experience, you can't argue complete removal from the action that's being done. Either way, that's a general principle in Shas that we find many times in Shas, that the concept of misasik doesn't make sense with chalavim and aroyas. Says the Rabbeinu Hananel, don't worry, that's only with chalavim and aroyas. But with misasik of Shabbos, you're potter, because melachot masheves asra Torah. Because of the principle of melachot masheves, you are exempt with misasik of Shabbos. So the Rabbeinu Hananel seems to learn the sugya on face value that we're talking about misasik here, classic misasik, and all he points out is that misasik is exempt from Shabbos because of the principle of melachot masheves. And then he goes on and he talks about nichole and lo nichole, etc. So he seems to learn that somehow there's a way of reading the sugya where the sugya is misasik, which seems to imply complete obliviousness about the result, and nonetheless the Gemara answers lo nichole. Now I have absolutely no idea what any of this means, other than to say that Rabbeinu Hananel learns the Gemara k'pshutoi. As Edgar correctly points out, it's a reasonable reading in Rashi, that Rashi learns misasik. This is not a sugya of Dover She'einu Miskavin, and it's a sugya of misasik, and somehow it's relevant to talk about misasik over here, even though presumably the Chilazon farmers become aware that they're killing all the Chilazons that they're squeezing, and even though the Gemara then begins talking about lo nichole in the concept of the sugya, and I don't know at all what the longus of the sugya would be if that's what's going on in the sugya. So Edgar's absolutely right to point out, we shouldn't forget there's an alternative sugya that might be going on over here, a sugya of misasik. I don't know how it's misasik. The sugya where the Gemara answers lo nichole, I don't know how the concept of lo nichole and psik ratio is relevant to misasik, but that's how Rabbeinu Hananel seems to learn it, and maybe that's how Rashi seems to learn it. I would have been a happier man had I not discovered the Rabbeinu Hananel, but Unfortunately, I've found Rabbeinu Chananel, and I mean, I'm joking. We have to learn Torah, but I don't understand it. I don't understand what Rabbeinu Chananel means. But at least Rabbeinu Chananel saved my soul from becoming biased in my reading of Rashi, because I was tempted to shift to only reading Rashi as Davar Shem Miskavin and making Misasik Lav Dafka. Rabbeinu Chananel demonstrates to us that there was at least one Rishon who was willing to learn the Sukkot of Misasik, in which case we need to be open-minded that maybe that's what Rashi meant, even though I don't know what on earth that would mean and how on earth we can read the Sukkah. So that's I guess, concludes what we would want to say in Rashi. I want to spend one more shiur, which is Sunday, on trying to tidy up little bits and pieces of Tosfos, and also the Ramban, which we haven't yet finished extracting every nuance of the Ramban that I want to bring out from it. So I hope, Emiyat Hashem, on Sunday to finish off the Sugya, and maybe Tuesday, and then we'll move on to the next Sugya. We need to move on to after the 2 dots. So I hope to give shiur Sunday. If I'm not able, I may not be able to give shiur Sunday, in which case I'll give shiur on Tuesday, but definitely by Tuesday, either way, that will be our last bit of this Sugya, and then we'll move on to the next 2 dots till the end of the term, which I think will be the week before Disha B'Av. Adam and I are currently talking about when to restart the term. So I think it'd be helpful if people let us know. We'd like to restart the term near the end of August, unless there's really like a critical mass of people who are planning to be away at the end of August. So if you're planning to be away at the last week or 2 of August, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll restart the new term near the end of August.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.